Hey, how's it going? Welcome to a new RocketBot class, and today we're going to build our first robot. My name is Augusto, and I'll be in charge of today's class. Alright, so what are we going to do today? Today, we're going to do the following. We're going to build a robot that, goes into Google and extracts some kind of text. We're going to use best practices. We're going to see how the robot is made, how it can be built, and what's the most efficient way to do it. Alright, to get started, let's go to New Robot. We're going to put, we're going to name it Google. Notice that it doesn't have any special characters at all. Break time equals 0.5s/, and in the description field, we are going to carefully write. This particular robot will be primarily in charge of performing a comprehensive search on the Google search engine and then accurately extracting the specifically assigned text from the search results. We're going to save, and we'll automatically enter our RocketBot study. So, next, we're going to open the web browser. So, we go to the web commands and we're going to drag the command over here. And in this section, we can already see that we can select the browser, in this case, the web browser. I'm going to choose Chrome, but you can select Firefox, Internet Explorer, or Safari, and the Google URL. We're going to enter www.google.co.ar, no, just .com. And we're going to click Run. And we can see that the browser has already started. Alright, once the browser is open. So, after thoroughly testing the browser, we are now going to proceed with the following. Notice that in this particular command, we can enter both the specific browser and its corresponding URL, which in this instance you can certainly put here, or, as widely accepted best practices strongly suggest, you should place it within a dedicated variable. In this case, we're going to put it in the URL variable, and we'll need to create the URL variable, which will contain the appropriate information, and here we're going to enter web categories. Alright. So, we come here and see that it's already selected. And here we have another section called ID. This section helps us identify the browsers we have open. That is, if we're working with two or more browsers, it's best to assign each one an ID to differentiate them, so that later, when we want to switch from one browser to another, we just specify which ID we're referring to, and with that, we'll carry out the task we want or assign to the browser we're addressing, so to speak. And then a profile is basically a folder that stores a certain configuration. That is, if, for example, to launch a browser it asks us for a certain configuration, when we assign a folder as the profile, all that configuration for our browser will be saved in that folder. What for? So that later, the second time this robot runs on this browser, on this computer, it takes the configuration that's saved in the folder on my computer and doesn't ask us to go through all the setup again. Let's go to an example. Let's say we want to start to automate a bot so it logs into WhatsApp Web. Notice that when you start WhatsApp Web for the first time on a computer, it asks you for a QR code. Scan the QR code, right? Now, imagine we're automating a robot that has to log in every time it runs to WhatsApp Web in the browser. What's going to happen? The following will happen. Every time we want to log in, it's going to ask us to scan the QR code on each run. That means that every time the robot runs, we have to be there in front of the screen scanning the QR code. And that's not practical because, well, what if that robot is set up to run on a Sunday at 6 in the morning? Well, I don't think anyone wants to get up at 6 in the morning on a Sunday to scan a QR code. That's what the folder, the profile, or the profile we assign is for. That is, I assign a folder where I want it to be saved on my computer and, well, the first time, obviously, I'll have to scan the QR code, but during that run, the robot already saves that QR code scan information in an internal folder inside the computer. Therefore, on the second run that the robot performs, it will take the information stored in that folder, which we assigned in the profile, and we won't have to scan the QR code again. We just do it once and it lasts forever. Well, forever, or until we change a certain setting if we don't want it to remain active. Alright, that's what the profile is for. Okay, here in the description we're going to right open Google Browser. This is very important, the comment, the description that you add above, because it's part of good practices. Why? Because, for example, if I build this robot and then, for some reason, like if I go on vacation or get sick, or if I want to hand the robot over to a colleague so they can review it or keep working on it, if it doesn't have these comments where we describe what each command does, the person who takes over the robot to work on or develop it won't know what each command does, or they'll have to guess. That's precisely why it's absolutely essential to always add the appropriate and helpful comments to the various commands so that you or someone else, perhaps a future developer, knows exactly and clearly what each individual command truly does. Alright, now, once I've opened the web browser with the Google page and made sure it's working properly, what should I do next? Basically, in essence, best practices universally dictate that whenever you perform a specific action like opening a file, starting a process, connecting to a network, or anything fundamentally similar, when you meticulously execute an operation that could potentially return either an expected, successful outcome or an unexpected, problematic result, you absolutely need to thoroughly validate that particular action. That is, you need to tell the robot that if the response returned by the operation is what you expect, it should perform certain actions, and if the response is not what you expect, it should do something else. How can you validate that? Basically, by performing the action that determines the result and storing it in a variable, and then using that, for example, with an if statement in this case. Now let's see how it's done. Alright, so we start, we run the command, and we'll see that Google opens. Once Google opens, we see this window is open and we can already assume that the command works correctly and that the URL we've specified is correct. Now, what's the next step we need to take? Since we're starting up a browser, or opening a browser, what could happen with this browser? Two things can happen. Either it connects correctly as just happened, or it doesn't. For example, if we entered the URL incorrectly, or we have a connection error due to lack of internet or other issues. So, for that, we need to tell the robot to perform other actions. So, how do we do that? Alright, inside the browser, we're going to right-click with the mouse. There, we right-click and we have an option called Inspect. We left-click to select it, and here where the three dots are, we're going to dock this panel down here to make it a bit more comfortable, nicer to look at, and more intuitive. Alright, so notice that as I move through all the tags, it highlights different elements. To select an element, I need to left-click on this icon, the pointer icon. When I do this, it's already selected, and if I go through each element, it shows me the tag for that element, as you can see down below. So, what am I going to select? I'm going to select an element that tells the robot that, when the browser opens, if that element exists, it should give me one response, and if it doesn't exist, it should give me a different response. So, what is the crucial element that is useful to me? It's precisely the search bar in this case, because if the search bar isn't there, I can't do any searches later. So, I'm going to select it. Notice that when I select it, it gives me this label, this tag, from which I need to extract info, meaning I need to extract the information it contains, whether it's, for example, the XPath, the ID, the class. We're going to see that now. So I right-click and notice there's an option called Copy, and under Copy we're going to select Copy XPath. For now, let's tell it to copy the XPath. Alright, let's go to Rocketbot, and there's an option within the native commands in the web section called Wait for Object. So let's select it, and here we're going to paste the element that we copied earlier, which is the XPath. For data type, we're going to set it as an XPath. For action, we're going to leave it as visible because I want it to be at least visible to the eye, and we're going to assign this result to a variable. Notice, since I haven't created it yet, I'm going to create it from here. So now the variable is created, and if I run this command, what it returns is a true. If that's not the case, for example, I'm going to change the XPath and say it's a name in this case. Look, it's going to return false. Why? Because it didn't find any element called with the tag name that has this data. So let's set it back to XPath, run it again, and it'll return true. Notice that depending on whether the result was positive or negative, or whether it was what we expected or not, it returns true or false. Alright, what is this useful for? As we mentioned earlier, it's useful for performing the corresponding validation using the logical if command. That is, this if command, this logical command, works like this. I'm going to give it something, a parameter, right? And if it meets this parameter, it's going to execute this part and then, afterwards, it will exit, right? If that parameter isn't met, it goes straight down here, executes what's inside here, and then exits. Now, there's a matter of logic, Python logic especially, that the first part, the first step we see here, can never be left empty, because that would cause an error, a logic error right away. So, the if must always have some task to perform. The else, on the other hand, can be left empty. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to decide that, for example, after opening the browser, what it can do is click on an object, right? Now, look, I'm doing the validation this way. Here I'm going to put res. As it says, Python logic, what it determines is that it will wait, or the result will wait to be true. If it's not true, it's going to indicate that it's false. That is, in this case, if it's true, meaning if the information that comes in res is true, it will execute what's in the if, which in this case would be this command. If it's not true, it executes whatever is down here. But if I don't want to put anything down here, I just don't put anything, and it continues with the robot's execution, but without having executed the if. Now, if it's correct, it only executes the if and moves on. That is, it either executes the block above, which would be the if, or it executes the block below, which is the else. It can't execute one and then the other. It's one or the other.